do organisms reproduce? Sexual reproduction. Reproductive parts of the flowering plants. The reproductive parts of the flowering plants are located in the flower. The different parts of the flower are sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. The stamens and the carpels are the reproductive parts of a flower which contains the germ cell. The flower can either be unisexual like papaya or watermelon, where it contains either the stamens or carpels, or can be bisexual like hibiscus and mustard. The bisexual flower contains both the stamens and the carpels. The stamens are the male reproductive part and the carpels are the female reproductive part. Stamens produce the pollen grains, usually seen as the yellowish powder that often sticks to our hand when we touch the stamens of the flower. Carpel is present in the center of a flower and is the female reproductive part. It is made up of 3 parts. The swollen part at the bottom, called the ovary. Middle elongated part, called the style. The terminal part, which may be sticky, called the stigma. The ovary contains the ovules, and each ovule contains an egg cell. The male germ cell, produced by the pollen grains, fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule. This fusion of germ cells or fertilization gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. Thus, the pollen grains need to be transferred from the stamens to the stigma. If the transfer of the pollen grains takes place in the same flower, it is called as self-pollination. On the other hand, if the pollen grains are transferred from one flower to the other, it is referred to as cross-pollination. This transfer of pollen grains from one flower to the other is achieved by the agents like wind, water, or animals. After the pollen grain lands on the suitable stigma, it has to reach the female germ cell, that is, in the ovary. For this, a tube grows out of the pollen grain and travels through the style to reach the ovary. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and is gradually converted into seed. The seed contains the blueprint for the further generation. Under appropriate conditions, the seed develops into seedling. This process is termed as germination. Summary: roots, stems, and leaves of some plants develop into new plants through vegetative propagation. These are examples of asexual reproduction where new generations are created from a single individual. Sexual reproduction involves 2 individuals for the creation of a new individual. DNA copying mechanisms create variations which are useful for ensuring the survival of the species. Modes of sexual reproduction allow for greater variation to be generated. Reproduction in flowering plants involves transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, which is referred to as pollination. This is followed by fertilization.